Poštovane dame I gospodo, dobar dan I
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the expert panel discussion about the tax culture and how to improve it. We want to talk about the significance of tax payments and the quality of tax procedures and regulations and experiences from other countries. We will also launch the student debate and competition, and to allow the youth to present their arguments as to whether they're in favor of in favor of the suppression measures or incentives. This is organized by the Belgrade University and NALED with the support of the KPMG and GIZ within the joint project, the support to the Serbian government in suppression of the shadow economy. At the beginning, I would like to turn the floor over to Ivanka Popovic, the rector of the Belgrade University, to open today's debate officially. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear representatives of the tax administration, government authorities, dear students, it is my honor to be able to participate in the opening of a very useful gathering, a very useful event that is being organized with our friends, with the KPMG and GIZ. This is a topic that is not present enough. That is the topic that for which the general public doesn't show a sufficient understanding, and the students should be those to understand what is a constructive tax policy, how it can contribute to the development of our society and encourage the change. I think that the debate is a good fashion, good manner to share the opinions and to see how we can implement a good tax policy to the benefit of us all. The taxpayers and the government are partners in this business, and in our desire not to be too strict and restrictive, we wanted to open this debate to encourage the development of our government. I wish successful debate to all participants, and the fact that they're here means that they're winners. They're all winners, and I wish, and I would say, just let the best ones win. Thank you. The strengthening of the awareness of the citizens about the significance of the payments of the taxes is something that is one of the objectives of the national strategy for the suppression of the shadow economy. And we will hear more about the alliance for the fair competition that was involved in this effort, and we will hear more about this from Igor Lončarević, a representative of the KPMG. Esteemed Director Popovic, dear partners and friends, it is my pleasure to have an opportunity today to have experts from tax administration and fiscal council, but also professors, university professors of the Belgrade University. And we will discuss an important topic, namely the tax culture, the tax discipline in Serbia, and our attitude towards taxes. In particular, I would like to welcome Professor Nere, who has been supporting the tax reform in Serbia for many years now, and now he has to present his experiences from Moldova. And also I would like to express my thanks to the GIZ for a long-standing partnership in the fight against the shadow economy. Today we will launch the student competition, symbolically titled a stick or a carrot, because we want to use the competition of arguments to learn about the opinion of the young people and what they think as to whether suppression measures are better than incentives in encouraging the tax culture. NALED has supported the national sweepstakes Take an Invoice and Win 2020, launched to better inform the entire families and citizens about their liabilities and to contribute to the to the development of the whole society. When the National Strategy for the Suppression of Shadow Economy was introduced in 2014, this was just a beginning point in the efforts to improve the tax culture in Serbia. This is the business. This is the job that takes much more than one step. It requires a lot of effort to be invested with many partners. The problem with the shadow economy and the non-tax non-compliance has been pointed out by NALED's research of the attitude of citizens towards tax payments. And as many as 3/4 of the citizens think that the shadow economy is not acceptable, but most of them don't see their role in it. Every fifth person always wants to have a receipt in a store, and the same number of them is ready to report a business that did not issue an invoice. Also, a significant percentage, the same percentage actually, is ready to report non-compliance. Most businesses also are inert towards the shadow economy, even though businesses recognize that the unfair competition is threatening their businesses. 4 out of 5 businesses do not support the shadow economy, but every third business would report the participation in the shadow economy. The citizens and the businesses consider the government to be solely responsible for the tax collection. The Serbia collects more than 1,000 billion of dinars in taxes. This is only 20% of GDP, whereas other countries with stronger tax culture are able to collect much more, which means that we have to increase the awareness that the tax revenues are not going to an imaginary country. This is something that flows in our joint budget to finance education, healthcare, roads, all other public goods and services. And the topic that concerns the tax culture is not just a Serbian topic, it's a global topic. And what's interesting is that the OECD has launched a study, and that study has shown that, or many studies, and those studies shows that the compliance is not dependent on the tax rates, but it depends on a series of factors. And amongst others, those are the ease of compliance, the capacity, the efficiency, the professionalism of the tax administration, and the efforts invested to educate taxpayers. And by strengthening the awareness of the strengthening of awareness of the importance of tax payment is an important objective of the national strategy for the suppression of the shadow economy, prepared by many ministries and businesses. And the strategy involves a series of incentives for those who want to do business in the white zone, but also suppression measures who do not want to play a game in the fair market. And many of the measures anticipated by the national program have been supported by NALED, together with its partners like GIZ, the EBRD, USAID, the Norwegian Embassy, and others. I must emphasize that most of these measures that were worked on by NALED can be defined as stimulative measures, like the automation of the issuance of the tax assessments for those who are within the presumptive tax regime. This is the first year for them to obtain their assessment in electronic form. Also, the tax exemption for startups. They are exempt from paying taxes in the first year. And I must emphasize that there is a reform that concerns the registration of seasonal workers. And for the first time, we have more than 43,000 seasonal workers that have been legally hired and engaged. Also, the e-inspector system is there in place as a national call center of the Republic Inspectorates open to report the non-compliance. I must say that in participation of the Belgrade University, our new honorable member, is a sign that tells everybody about the significance that we place on the communication and education education. Once again, Rector, I would like to thank you for your support. A legendary American judge, Robert Holmes, said that the taxes are the price that we pay to live in a civilized society. I'm sure that we all want Serbia to be part of the developed countries and the developed world with its tax culture. And I think that students want this most, who are now at the point when they need to decide as to whether they will continue their careers and lives in Serbia or elsewhere. And for that reason, I would like to invite you to join us and to use your fresh idea to contribute to this common objective to the well-being of us all. Thank you. I would like to thank our introductory speakers, and I would like us to begin our expert discussion. And it is an enormous pleasure of mine for me to participate in this round table. We have three of us. To my left is Miroslav Đinović. He's an assistant to director of the Tax Administration Center for Big Taxpayers. Igor has been already presented, and together with us we have Dr. Birgen Nere, an expert who's currently working in Moldova, and we have Nicola Altiparmatov, the member of the Fiscal Council, and also the professor of the tax law in Belgrade. And we have a special guest here and of this panel, but I will not say his name now. I will keep you in suspense. But he will join us later on. He's a very interesting participant. I will begin with Professor Nera. He wrote his PhD thesis on this topic, and I would like to ask him the first question. Basically, what the students who would like to take part in this participation, they would like to know, what is the tax culture? Are we talking only about taxpayers, or we are talking about the government, tax system, tax rules? What is all implied? How can we explain this topic to potential competitors? Who has the biggest impact? Who can contribute most to the improvement of the tax culture in a government? Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. It is an honor of mine to speak today with you, my esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and friends from the Tax Administration and the Ministry of Finance here. So the first question is, it's a university like or a question that would be presented in a university setting. I will share my screen with you, and now you can see this slide that shows the tax culture. So if we consult the tax textbooks looking for the definition of the tax culture, we will find this extraordinary article written by Kleber Arkum. This was written more than 70 years ago. It involves 164 definitions of culture. This is something that was provided by historians and sociologists, and I assume that this number of definitions has increased till to date. And as for, this is about the culture, but as for the tax culture, there's one definition of it, and it is an answer to your question. Now, we need to see who has the biggest effect to the tax culture. The definition is this: the tax culture of a nation or a government implies all of the institutions that are interlinked in the tax system, and those who practically implement and administer taxes, including all kinds of fashions of thinking and social interactions, as well as the legal and administrative arrangements that have been provided or developed in a national and historical development of a government. You see that the tax culture implies interaction. And as we say, this is embedded. The tax culture is embedded in the national culture. So it is closely connected with the culture in general, as to whether people love the government or don't, whether people have some special attitudes or views of life. This all has an impact on the tax culture, and as well as the tax law as well. This is the framework that basically defines our playground. And the tax administration is a big player in all this. The tax administration is responsible to do what the tax law imposed it to do, and also we have the Ministry of Finance. We have the schools, the university. They also have a big impact on the tax culture. And we've seen Igor of KPMG, also other players are there. All this contributes to the voluntary or involuntary interaction. For instance, I as a citizen, when I come to the tax administration, I see whether they're pleasant, whether they trust me. Believe me, if I tell them I will bring that additional paper tomorrow or similar. So this is not something that you can measure. You cannot measure the tax culture. You can only describe it as an entire system, as a very comprehensive system. So when in talking about it, you cannot only talk about the economy, the sociology. You must talk about law and history of a nation, and because the tax culture has been developed a long time ago. This is my timer. They told me that I need to be brief, so I had to set it up. Thank you, Mr. Nere. We've heard, you told us what the definition of the tax culture is, but how the government sees this definition. What is the government's view of this? Are the taxpayers compliant, willing to pay the taxes? We have this case now with freelancers. We see that they're dissatisfied when it comes to paying taxes. Our study shows that 1/3 of the businesses are doing at least portion of their business in the shadow zone. So what do you see? What is the attitude of the taxpayers getting improving? Is it getting better? Good afternoon to you all. Before I answer to your question, I just want to make a comment to what our colleague said. I think that the tax culture is really important. It should be, we should have strategic objectives when it comes to the tax culture. And I assume that most of our citizens want Serbia to be a developed country when it comes to the culture and all other aspects. And to do so, we need to create the prerequisites, and creating material base to enable this development is something that we should use taxes for. This is the purpose of the taxes, and this is why we need to mention this, the aspiration of all our citizens, not just to talk about, we're not supposed to talk about the government authorities. I must admit that the tax culture as an issue of interest of the entire society is finally getting its place, and that our citizens finally understand that the money they paid for the taxes do not go to a foreigner, and that money is not kept in a safety deposit box elsewhere. They're more aware now that by paying the taxes and by voluntarily paying the taxes, they enable themselves the right to a pension at some point, they enable themselves to have a satisfied doctor, to have a happy doctors, or to have a series of events organized in Serbia. So paying taxes is not just about one citizen, it's not about one taxpayer, or it's not about the tax administration that collects the taxes. This needs to be a strategic issue. And we want our citizens and individuals to be absolutely aware of the fact that by paying taxes they can only get benefits rather than harm. when it comes to the collection of taxes, I think that the results are not as expected, because when the disease appeared, we thought that the tax collection would drop. But I must say that the Center for Big Taxpayers, that covers less than 40% of our tax collection, has recorded 1.4% of a drop, actually, of a decrease in the tax collection. And given the crisis, given the general crisis, not just in Serbia, but elsewhere, at the macro level, I must say that this result, that when it comes to tax collection, is acceptable. So we haven't generated the growth from 3 to 5% as the trend was in the last several years, but the drop of 5% in the tax collection is a satisfying result in this crisis. Mr. Altipar Matkov, you've been following the fiscal policies for years and the budget execution as well. And the studies shows that the budget spending is something that has an impact to the tax culture in a country. How would you rate the spending and distribution of the money? Whether it is for the operating budget or for the capital budget or for the servicing of the debt, whether our budget spending is transparent, and what are the effects of all this when it comes to the tax culture, and what can be changed in that respect? I apologize. Good afternoon. Let me begin with a quote. This is Adam Smith's quote, who said that there is a brief road from the barbarism to the well-being. We only need peace, reasonable taxes, and rule of law. So this is the other side of the tax morale and tax culture. So in order for us to have a tax morale, tax culture, to turn the theory mentioned by our colleague into practice, you must have these prerequisites in place. So you must have the rule of law and reasonable taxes. And unfortunately, it is a fact that most countries don't have these, with the exception of Scandinavian countries. When we talk about voluntarily tax compliances, we are just talking about the shades of black. Whether the topic is the states where the richest people, including the U.S. president, are paying just minor amounts in taxes because of their loopholes in laws, or maybe we could talk about the lack of rule of law in the Balkans, but relying on this and believing that we can use or harness the tax morale to increase the voluntarily tax collection or compliance is as if what my daughter last night said. She would like for a tooth fairy to exist, but she knows that she will get a gift from me and my wife. So we can hope for this. What I want to say is that, but the fact remains is that in Serbia and in most other countries in the world, the tax collection absolutely depends on an adequate tax administration and then adequate courts that are able or should be able to prosecute the cases of non-compliance. That's why we've been listening about this. For instance, the 3 best soccer players have been caught evading taxes. I'm sure that they knew how to fill their tax declarations and tax returns, but this only goes to show that at the end of the day, you have to have an adequate tax administration if you want to suppress this problem. And I would agree here, and I would commend our tax administration and how they reacted at the times of crisis. And we have shown this in our last report. We haven't seen any increase in the shadow economy as it was present during the crisis of 2008 and 2009. And this is something that helped our budget. This is something that helped us keep decent results. as this is possible, as far as this is possible at the times of the crisis. Ms. Popov, since the professor has an important meeting right after this, she will leave us soon, but let's use your participation here. And given the fact that you teach tax law, what can you tell us? What our tax laws are like? Are they adequate to the circumstances in our country? What is their effect to the tax culture? Thank you. Well, you know, we all know this, the tax substance is, in its nature, very complex. And hence, we in Serbia, just like people in any other country, cannot expect our tax regulations and rules to be simple and to be understandable, to be easy to understand for a common citizens, to be clear, for them to know what to do. But I think that for the most part, and naturally there are always features that can be improved, but I don't think that our tax culture or tax awareness is subject to influence by the tax rules. Our tax rules and laws are good, are adequate. Once again, there's always room for improvement in the Serbian system, just like in any other. Naturally, there is always there are always features that can be improved. There are always loopholes, and this is not true only for our country, but other countries as well. So what I'm saying is loopholes or gaps are not the reason for poor or improved tax culture. And what I would like to say now, and use this opportunity, given that our action plan, one of the objectives in it concerns the training or specialization of judges of misdemeanor courts or misdemeanor judges in this area, and I believe that this is an important measures. But, for instance, tax offenses in our Serbian tax rules need to be better regulated in order for those who need to apply it better. So the general conclusion is that our tax laws and rules are solid, that this area is a complex one, and you cannot expect that every citizen would understand them equally well. Mr. Lončarević, you are employed with KPMG, a big company. So what is your vantage point, whether the tax liabilities are seen in the same way here or in other countries? Just like in other countries, I must say that the morale, tax morale, as a topic here in Serbia, and doesn't mean the same as in other countries. Tax morale, tax culture here pertains to compliance, the adherence to the tax law, and when we say that the person is accountable, we describe a person who has paid his or her taxes. But when we see that, when we see the affairs like Luxembourg leaks and Panama affairs, Panama Papers, we see that a lot of businesses used legitimate tools. So all these affairs point to the fact that many businesses use legitimate tools to pay a lower total tax than an average entrepreneur. So when they talk about tax morale and tax culture, they don't talk about compliance with tax rules per se. No, and payment of taxes, because this goes without saying. No, they primarily talk about the following: whether the companies understand their social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, and whether when they are in the position to pay less, whether they organize board meetings to discuss as to whether this is acceptable or not, to pay less. And I would like to emphasize one fact, and that is that a payment of taxes based in law. This is not the matter of morale. This is a subjective element. For instance, one act that is moral or right for one taxpayer should not be so for another. We need to focus our attention to compliance. If, in speaking about multinational corporations, after many issues that have been raised, we see that our environment is changing. We are now exchanging information very quickly. We see social media's impact, and we see that the general public is more sensitive. Has become more sensitive to these issues, and therefore the multinational corporations consider tax issues very carefully before reaching any decision. For instance, the issue of tax morale can also be as to whether, in addition to incentives and incentive packages provided by the government, like direct subsidies, whether the developer or investor would also use some other tax incentives, like the exemption of the payment of the corporate profit tax. Since, for instance, Serbia still offers packages pursuant to the law on the FDIs. We also have the incentives provided by our tax regulations. And when business decisions are made, I must say that businesses carefully consider whether to use certain incentive packages or not. For instance, you have a company, an industrial company, a serious polluter, and that company seriously considers as to whether, in addition to doing its business in a particular industry, will use the tax incentive that is offered pursuant to the law, and whether we will use the money or subsidies to hire additional workers or not. And often this type of questions or issues is something, and when you consider them, is something that can be described as tax morale. So tax morale is about the policies, company policies, and we see that lately, we lately see that a lot of multinational companies publish something that is called transparency, tax transparency, providing information to the general public about the company's tax policies and what is their attitude towards the taxes and tax incentives. Thank you, Igor. This is an opportunity for me to conclude our first round of questions with the guest that I announced. I would like to wish him good morning because he will join us here from Washington. This is our former Minister of Finance, Dusan Vujović. This is an opportunity for you, Mr. Vujović, to sum it all up and to tell us more about the tax culture and about your view of it. So can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can hear you. It's... I don't hear you clearly. I guess that the refresh rate is not the best here, but I'll try to be brief. First, I'm so glad to see that such a conference is being organized, because I'm aware of the fact that efforts have been made here to improve the tax culture in Serbia, and from the very beginning, from the first slide presented by Mr. Nere, and given the discussion presented here, we realized that this is a very complex topic, and we're not talking only about the current aspects of the culture. We are also talking about the inherited elements, the elements that we inherited from 500 years ago. And the attitude, we were talking about the attitude of the people towards the government. You said people see the non-compliance and they're not ready to report it. So we see that people are basically covering it up. And this is something that we have inherited. And we see that there is something that gives rise to a suspicion, but still people find the reasons to support it, to justify it. Every country deals with it in its own way. What you see in the state, you see that they have a hypertrophy, not just when it comes to laws, but also education and healthcare. And legal professionals are moderate the events or circumstances in a society. But let me go back to some things. Nicola has cited Adam Smith, and some things are known for years, for ages. So we are aware, we know perfectly well that without the rule of law, without belief that the tax money will be spent in the right way, people would still be reluctant. And their moral attitude would be, well, non-compliance is maybe my right, because I see that my government is not spending the money in the right way, because we don't see any reports about spending. We haven't had the report about the budget spending for several years now. Maybe the government has been allocating funds in a fashion that cannot be qualified as transparent ones. But we see what is going on in the countries in Africa, and we see that we are not completely original. We see that other governments are using the same thing. Basically, they're combined what it says in the law with what they actually do, with what the tax administration does. So the tax policies should be finalized by the Ministry of Finance, and basically the tax policies are something that the tax administration should be implemented. We had a famous specialist, Milka was a specialist in tax administration, and she said that the tax policy comprises only those rules applied by the tax administration. Everything else is just left on paper. Whatever is left on paper, whatever is not implemented, does not constitute the actual tax policy. But allow me to offer a couple of comments. We are in a situation which is as it is, and since we see that our people are jaywalking or every day are crossing the street improperly, we see that our tax culture has remained the same for many years. This doesn't mean that we have achieved what we could have achieved, but what this means is that we are on we're going in the right direction. I don't want you to misunderstand me, but in the States, there are people who are paying qualified lawyers and high-skilled lawyers to minimize their taxes. Mr. Trump has been avoiding taxes for years, but this is a tax avoidance by him saying, I pay a lot of taxes. And he's been asked, do you pay the profit tax? And he keeps avoiding this answer and this question. He goes back to the fact that his corporations are paying taxes. And basically, he's talking about his losses, and he wants to be exempt from the payment of the tax that he wants to avoid. And this is something that will not be that will be present in every country. But we're talking about something else. We're talking about the secondary methods to check the position of the taxpayer, and this is very important. So the tax administration is controlling millions of sources of information, and by cross-referencing them, it receives red flags. And for instance, the states, with 5% of checks, can control 95% of violations of tax laws. I'm talking, but I'm not talking about those people who have expensive, highly qualified lawyers who help them avoid taxes. But in this country, when you live in Serbia, you see that the government shows signals to you. For instance, you have tax programs who suggest just what you need to do. They literally tell you what the government knows about you. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the government knows a lot of things about people. Last year, when I reported my personal income tax, I learned that the government has had 90% of information about my income, and they found even per diems about two papers that I wrote. I forgot about it. It was a couple of thousands of dinars. It was irrelevant. But I'm saying that our tax administration is ready to catch up with the world, and it's just I'm saying that the tax administration clearly tells you that they have that it has information about you, that it knows what your property taxes should be, and what your taxes at different levels should be like. So this power, this is something that the government can use pursuant to law, and it should pursue this softly, but everybody should know. Just like with the crossings, when a person is crossing the street illegally, there should be a police officer there, and he or she should issue the citation on the spot. But what is important, it's not about this. This is not about the sanction. It's about the threat. We used to say we had lots of citations on the spot, and the value thereof was not high, but they were issued very often. So when you have a tax inspector coming to you, he would spend 7 days looking into your documents, and basically what he can do better is he or she can improve the tax compliance. And the government should be rational where levying the taxes. And also people must know that it's not so easy to escape the taxes. And now we have the system where all this is in place. And now, for instance, we have the secondary assessment methods, like the size of the house, the type of the car, and we have all kinds of secondary factors that show the level of income. And now, for instance, some people are placed in the category that should pay high taxes. And who pays high taxes here? Well, those are people who have legitimate sources of income, of very high income. And those are professors, lawyers. So those are professions who are supposed to be gatekeepers. And basically, they're the largest obstacle to transparency. They don't want to be part of the accounting systems. They don't want to have cash registers for us to know what their income is. Can we stop here? And I want you to keep your ideas for the second part of the discussion. Mr. Nere, you have also similar experience. Would you single out a country that has improved its tax culture significantly? That can be the model that we will rely on? Well, that's a very, very difficult for me. Now, if we take a look at the tax culture as a tax culture, and if we take a look at other countries and what is in place, that would be very difficult for me. But example number one, Gordana Ilić-Popov mentioned that she thinks that the tax laws in Serbia are adequate. But let me mention Germany. Germany has the most complex tax rules. It says that 50% of textbooks written about taxes are written in Germany and about German tax systems. And as a German, I can say this: German tax laws are poor, are complicated. A common person and an ordinary person cannot understand it. So I, as a German citizen, would need somebody to help me to be in compliance with our rules. But mostly, as we said, voluntary tax payment is okay, even though, or despite of the fact that our laws are not as good as we would want them to be. Naturally, I know that you will ask this question, but if we take a look at Europe and European countries, I don't want to rely on cases from Africa. But for instance, let's take Sweden in account. So some years ago, they were absolute disaster when it comes to tax culture and tax administration. The tax administration was very poor, but they managed to introduce a significant, large program to rebrand this area. They wanted their tax administration to obtain a new image, to build a new image, to be client-oriented, to become more efficient. So they wanted to present the tax administration as an institution that helps, or that wants to help taxpayers comply with their tax liabilities. And if you if you take a look at their taxes are high. Taxes in Sweden are high if we take into account the healthcare costs and seasonal costs. We're talking about benefits, and 60% of benefits, so 60% of the salary accounts for benefits, and it goes to the government. Just like our previous speaker has mentioned, people see that they are getting something in return. We had this program in Serbia, pay the tax so that you can get something in return. So if citizens can see that the government is doing something good with their money, this is the way to improve the The only thing that we need to mention, as the former minister has said, we are going in the right direction. Everything is better than 20 years ago. Unfortunately, I only have information about 2012. Every year that involves programs implemented by GIZ. Also, what I want to say is that we have research or surveys measuring the impact of our programs implemented in Serbia, and only 16% of citizens surveyed said at some point that they were very satisfied with the services of tax administration. This was in 2012. In 2019, only 13% were satisfied, and 31% of citizens were very satisfied with the tax administration. So you see that things are changing. We talked about the tax morale, we talked about the taxpayers, and now we can talk about efficiency and and administrations that are client-oriented. What is important to me is to mention this. In some countries, like in Germany, we don't see that the government is educating citizens about this. The government is not telling citizens why it is important for them to pay taxes. They all want to have nice highways in Germany. They all want their public education to be operational, to be functional. I think that Igor also mentioned that if people see that they're getting normal circumstances, they would be ready to pay their taxes. But this doesn't mean, and I must mention this, nowhere in this world, no one, there's not a single person who likes paying taxes. But if people see that they would get something in return, then this activity becomes somewhat easier. My answer to you would be, take a look at Sweden and the Scandinavian countries have developed a good tax morale, tax culture, but this was not always the case. And their efforts took some time. That you cannot change the tax culture overnight and for a year. It takes time. This is a fantastic introduction for the tax administration. So what is the tax literacy of our taxpayers? Do they know what is the difference between taxes and fees, what the tax procedures are, what it is that you do to educate citizens? Before I answer this, I just have a brief comment. The tax administration's opinion is that we cannot achieve our objective to improve the tax culture in a year, or not even in 4 years. And voluntary compliance doesn't imply giving up suppression measures. Suppression measures should be in place to control those who do not comply with the regulations. We in the center, in charge of big taxpayers, we have different treatment depending on the risk of non-compliance. So we have suppression measures that we use for high-risk businesses. There are only 5 of them, for instance. And we are very openly suppressive. We have very strict controls initiated against them. And as for other businesses that are face that face lower risks, we assume an advisory role, and we help them comply. And from the standpoint of big taxpayers, I would say that they're rather literate. There is a very, very small area for misunderstanding and lack of knowledge about the law. We have businesses that imply high risks, like construction companies. We have taxi cab drivers. The former minister knows this. We had meetings with taxi cab drivers talking about compliance, and there are groups that need to be familiarized with their taxes. It is in their interest to have a fair environment, to reduce the unfair competition. So our target population, or our target taxpayers with a lower tax culture, due to misunderstanding of the tax system or lack of knowledge about the tax system, due to the selfish need to keep the portion of their income that belongs to the entire society. Now they require a lot of time and lengthy procedures. Namely, we have our call center, we have the tax forum established within the Center for Big Taxpayers. These are all things that help us. Help the taxpayers understand their taxes. I have a question for Mr. Altiparmakov. What is the first thing that you would change when it comes to procedures and rules, tax procedures and rules? Please turn on your microphone. I made the same mistake twice. Let me add to what Professor Vujovic said and Professor Popov said. I disagree with Professor Popov and with her statement that our citizens don't understand our tax laws, that our tax laws are adequate. However, an average citizen cannot understand them. I think that an average citizen can understand the fact mentioned by Professor Vujovic rather well, that we have privileged citizens that are enabled to pay flat taxes, like lawyers, and this is enabled outside of all rules and regulations. And this is a loophole that has not been introduced yesterday. It's been here for 25 years, a quarter of century. And now, when we try to tax freelancers, and rightfully so, because we all have to pay the taxes, but how can you explain an IT expert, a freelancer, that he cannot pay the flat tax pursuant to the law, and his colleague who has graduated with the School of Law can do so? So how can you explain this? How can we move ahead and build our tax morale while having these obvious flaws in our system? This is the biggest flaw, the biggest loophole that undermines the integrity of the personal income taxes. further, and additionally, if we manage to address this, and if we manage to introduce a fair tax system, then what we need to do is to encourage its implementation. And in that aspect, in that sense, sanctions are important. And what Mr. Vujovic said, that the threat itself would have an effect, would produce an effect, rather than the fact how the money is spent. We're all aware of the fact that we must pay taxes in order for the schools, the hospitals, the roads to be paid for. But if we take a look in the last 20 years, you would see a lot of examples, beginning with the Christmas trees to the gifts and many other affairs that have occurred that would undermine the tax morale. And without an efficient system of sanctions and threats of sanctions to improve our morale. And for this, we need an efficient tax administration, because we see that pursuant to the international standards, our tax administration has a low number of employees. Their salaries are low, and the public sector cannot compete with companies like KPMG and other private companies that offer much higher salaries. So these should be our priorities: to have fair tax laws, to have a meaningful system of tax sanctions, and to have an adequate tax administration, basically to allow the tax administration in Serbia to employ a sufficient number of people and to pay them decent salaries. I would also give an opportunity to Professor Popov to provide her answer, but also she can talk about education, how to educate people, young people, about this, and how can we improve our tax culture through education, how to help people understand the significance of taxes and payment of taxes. I don't think this is that there is enough time to respond to what my esteemed colleague Altipan Rakov said, but let me go back to the objective. The objective is to instruct young people and to teach them that everyone has the liability to pay taxes. Allow me one sentence at the beginning. It concerns what my colleagues said. The progress has been made, and by looking in the period since 2000 and before that, nobody nobody mentioned that the tax culture is important for the success of any tax reform. We always we would always focus our attention to tax rules and liability and the laws, and also implementation thereof. So they all need to apply to everyone, because there's no use of a good law. What is the use of a good law if you do not apply it to everyone equally? And also, now we are talking about the tax culture. So it's been an hour since we started talking about the tax culture, and we talked only about the taxpayers. But the tax culture needs to be analyzed by looking at both sides in this tax relationship. On the one hand, on the one side, we have taxpayers. There is a taxpayer, but on the other side, on the other hand, there is the tax administration. And the first slide that we've seen presented by Mr. Nere shows the tax administration as important part of the system. When it comes to students and young people and people who are younger than students, it is important for us to develop their awareness of belonging to the country and their liabilities towards their country. I think that people now, young people now, think that services provided by a government and country be as if as if their services go without saying, and nothing goes without saying. In order for the government or the country to function, to operate, we all have to be involved in its work. This is not something abstract. What I'm saying, we need to teach even younger people, not just university students. We need to teach, we need to instill in them the feeling of debt or the feeling of liability towards their government. And we need to increase the trust and confidence of people in the result and the perception that the tax system is a fair system. My colleague Alti Parmatov said, mentioned freelancers and lawyers and taxi cab drivers, and I agree with this, what he said about this. So we must develop a belief that this tax system is fair, and we must meet the expectation of the taxpayers that the tax revenues would be spent in the fashion, in the way, that in such a way to enable the taxpayers. I prefer the term citizens rather than taxpayers. I'm not unlike my colleagues who are focused more on companies. So we need to explain that they would get better quality of public services and goods. And I will finish with this. I don't want to take too much of your time, but what the education can achieve, and the education, not just of the university students, but also younger students in high schools and lower schools. I think that we need to focus on that type of education, because the children or students should not see the tax inspectors in the way their parents would see them. Basically, to understand that those are people who are at the opposite side, that they're opposing them. The taxpayers and inspector are not sitting at two opposite sides. No, those are two groups of people working to achieve the same goal. The same goals, and this is something that needs to be explained, and this is something that can help improve the relationship between the taxpayers and the tax administration. And another important thing is that the tax culture can be developed or improved by upholding the rights of the taxpayers on the one hand, but also with the compliance of the taxpayers and awareness that this is everybody's duty. It doesn't mean that the patriotism is measured with the amount of taxes paid. We will all pay the taxes proportionate to our wealth, and also the patriotism is not measured with the subsidies used, but everyone needs to be loyal to the country and need to faithfully comply with or loyally comply with the liabilities. Now we will give an opportunity to students to ask questions, and at the end of the second round of questions, I would read actually some questions for Igor. Students' question that concern the tax administration and the relationship between the tax administration and the taxpayers. We need that the tax administration needs to change its attitude towards taxpayers and companies. What is the level of the tax administration, tax culture and within the government? Is it moral to levy 55.8% tax rate? Is it to levy 55.8% tax on someone who earns 300 or 400 euros by teaching English or foreign languages? One of the objections and critiques is that the tax administration is more prone to applying the old ways or the old habits rather than the enacted rules, and sometimes it's better not to object. Mr. Nere mentioned the tax culture and its impact, and everything, and actually factors that have an impact on the tax administration. And we have several thousands of employees, actually of people working for multinational corporations. And those corporations brought here a different type of culture, and this helped. This will help us make the change. So we are in the triangle. So between the taxpayer, and we want to help the taxpayers comply with their tax liabilities, and sometimes the laws are complex, sometimes they include gaps, but also we're here to protect the taxpayer's interest if they think that the tax administration has violated his or her rights, and that there is the tax law. This is the law on tax procedure, the law on tax procedure and tax administration. And this law also involves the principle of legality, which says or reads that the tax administration should equally take into account the facts that are beneficial and those who are presented at the prejudice of the taxpayer. And when it comes to the issue of freelancers, who, for instance, those who teach languages, this is the matter of tax culture and development thereof. So what I want to say, if you earn something, you need to pay tax. You need to pay the tax for it. If you ordered some goods online, you need to pay VAT or customs duties if this object or the item is subject to the customs duty. So this is the progress that I'm talking about. So when you go to a shop or store that pays taxes, you never ask the company whether they will pay VAT and whether they will pay the benefits, social benefits, retirement benefits. This goes without saying. And when it comes to new forms of employment, we need such progress. And technology helps many citizens start earn some income, and we would like to help many of them to do their business in the white zone. Now, whether the tax rate is good or not, this is up to the parliament. It's up to them to decide this. And let me mention digital businesses, and digitization, because it's electronic commerce, e-commerce help us cross-reference pieces of information about people's or companies' real estate, other forms and all forms of income and sources of income. And this is something that accelerates tax supervision, tax control, and helps the tax administration identify the risks fast. And we always have to bear in mind or be mindful that the two specific traits of the government is its legal right to apply force through the Ministry of the Interior and the Army, but also to collect taxes. So the role of the tax administration is very important, is crucial for the entire government system to be operational. And Mr. Altipar Markov also mentioned the necessity for these people, the employees of the national tax administration, to receive decent salaries. So the position of tax inspectors should be improved. This is an honest job, and they're here to defend the public interest and to defend the legitimacy of the laws, to collect the taxes pursuant to the law, not more, not less. Yes, you mentioned that the amount of the tax rate, the tax rates. A quick question for Mr. Vujovic. A student asked this. shouldn't those people who earn that a lower income be taxed lower? Now, this is about fair taxation, and we go back to this issue over and over again. I just want us to avoid this trap, because there will always be examples of people who pay taxes and people who don't pay them. It's about tax morale, and it's about the capacity of the tax administration to keep an eye on everybody. People will always say, look, this person doesn't pay the taxes, and I don't want to pay my taxes. But we should avoid this trap, and we should avoid saying that we are not equal under the law. We should all be equal and under the law. And about the tax rate, the amount of tax rate is relevant for those who earn a lot of money, a lot of income. The higher the revenues, the higher the income, the higher the rate. For those who have low tax bases, we have low tax rates. So I wouldn't go into discussion about whether the rate for the richer should be 50% and whether the rate for the poorer should be 10% or so. Yes, we should introduce the increased progressive taxation and tax rates for richer groups. But let me go back to what Nicola mentioned, fair collection. Yes, the tax administration is aware that some people don't see that the tax administration is investing efforts to impose fair system. We all know that lawyers, for instance, must pay higher taxes, but it is not up to the tax administration as to whether the lawyer would pay 100,000 or 50,000 dinars in taxes. This is up to the law to determine. We can also, what we can do is support the efforts in adopting the law on the origin of assets. So those who drive expensive vehicles and those who have a better lifestyle compared to others should pay higher taxes. We should support this effort, and if they failed to pay the taxes, they should also be sanctioned. Now, the question about, to Mr. Vujovic about the tax rate. This was asked by a student, whether the salary and payroll taxes are a key problem in Serbia. And this is something that Mr. Đinović mentioned, the progressive tax rate. The state has shown flexibility in this, and it's a world power in this area. So should we have the progressive taxation rates? And another question for you could be whether the implementation of the tax law is adequate. Is it better to close down the bakery? Is it better to close it down or sanction it if in case of non-compliance? Can you hear me? Yes, we had very, very good questions that concern reality. While I was in the Ministry of Finance, we would try to address them. And I have no illusions. I'm aware of the fact that we were able to cover only a small portion of it. We initiated the transformation of the tax administration, and we invested a lot of efforts to organize the tax administration better. But before I go into this, I just want to point out to a principle. This is where I left last time. We need to have a stable country. We need to have peace. We need to have reasonable taxes. And also, the tax administration must be an independent institution. Without its independence, we have an obstacle in place. For instance, we are tax inspectors, or the tax inspectors and analysts must be qualified, skilled persons. And we had people who used to work in the previous forms in SDK and basically in the former systems of the taxation. And basically, the taxes and the salaries on taxes were paid based on prior checks. We had 150, 160 taxation offices, tax offices, and taxes were charged for import, for sales tax, and also payroll taxes. And we would capture a lot of revenues in such a way. And the tax administration appeared as a new form of administration, appeared 20, 30 years ago. So this is a relatively short period, compared to that, and in terms of that, we have made a significant progress. But I'm so glad to hear that you mentioned the compliance-based system. And this is the only sustainable system, or you cannot enforce anything and keep it sustainable. So we need to opt for that kind of system in Serbia. And the question becomes how to introduce a good measure of it. Now, one of the systems, one of the ways is to ask people about it. The NALED is a champion of surveys and polling because this is not a homogeneous area. When you ask people, you can ask them what they're dissatisfied with, what can be done in the long term, what can be done in the short term, because real life involves completely unexpected situations. We discussed for ages as to how to move on from 150, 160 tax offices to only one. And we saw during those debates, we saw that some offices in Belgrade merged together. We see that people were sitting on top of each other, that they didn't have a place to store their files. So we were able to see that the life is presented as something completely different than we were talking about the theory. What I'm saying is that you cannot change the entire system at once, all at once. There are good models in the world, and what we need to do is consider change management. The tax administration is a big system, and it must apply different modus of operandi if it wants to be efficient, if it wants to use its knowledge and energy on the right things, meaning the tax inspectors must use their knowledge, harness their knowledge and skills, and they have to work closely with tax advisors of KPMG and other companies. So they need to take a look at the entire business. And in the absence of such skill sets that are not easy to obtain, our inspectors focus on easy, simple things, checking the accounts, checking specific items that do not require a lot of analytical work. And this is logical reaction of people who do not operate with good quality accounting operations and data and who are too close to the taxpayers. The key everywhere in the world when in talking about direct taxes is the distance. Just like we are exercising the distance now. So the distance between the tax inspector and the taxpayer. For a tax inspector to come to his job in the morning, to get an iPad with the data of the company that he or she will check today without knowing anyone in the company, and then another person would get the same set of information to control that particular inspector. And because everyone needs to be controlled. Now, in terms of the amount of taxes, we have rather high taxes compared to the amount of income and revenues the people generate. Our revenues, the revenues account for a high share in GDP. Now, the question is whether we rationally spend that money. And it is another issue is much more important as to whether we able to balance the tax burden, whether we were able to distribute the tax burden basically equally. Many taxes are charged to many salaries as if they're all the same or the standard ones, and they're not. And most of those people who earn the per diems or fees, consultant fees, if you will, they do not contribute to their pension package. So the persons pay double. They pay benefits to their regular salary and those per diems and consulting fees. So the NALED must look into this, how the tax instruments are being applied, and then we need to get the feedback. What I'm saying is that today, worldwide, we see detailed empirical studies that help policymakers create public policies and that help improving the practice. Progressive tax rate or not? Now, when it comes to the progressive tax rate, there were some studies in the States that 40, 50 years ago, progressive tax rates were much more frequently applied than today. Why? Because those who paid the high taxes were paying 80% of the high, and those people found the ways to avoid it. And now we see that we have a lot of rich people who pay low taxes, but also people who pay who earn less and pay more than them. Those rich people pay high amounts, but those are not high percentages of their income. What we need is we need to have proportionate taxation pursuant to the law. And this is a good interim step. If everybody is to pay the proportionate tax liabilities or taxes, that would be a good step into the right direction. Most countries in Europe, in the States, tolerate the lower, those who generate low income to avoid paying taxes. People who perform physical service, like physical labor, they are basically participants in the cash economy, and they pay taxes in a different way. They pay taxes through consumption, by paying the VAT and through consumption. And other modus of operandi, they pay local taxes when they rent an apartment or when they purchase an apartment. And so consumption taxes compensate for losses generated in terms of the income taxes. They don't spend much time for lower income generating persons, whereas the richer people try to hide themselves in many different ways. Now, since the point here of the competition is for the students to opt for the support to suppression or to the measures or to the incentives. So a quick question is, what are you rather? What would you rather support, the suppression measures or incentives? What would you support rather? In German, this is not a stick and a carrot. This is a cake or a whip. I don't like carrots, but I didn't even like them when I was a baby. But yes, I'm always in favor of a carrot, in favor of incentives. They always produce bigger impacts. But on the other hand, if taxpayers do not comply with lawyers, the laws, the carrot is there's no use of using carrot, a stick. We need to find a balance between a stick and a carrot. One cannot exist without the other. Maybe the suppression measures could be useful. For instance, if a person is aware that he or she would be punished for non-compliance, then to that extent the suppression measures can be okay. Mr. Altiparmakov? Yes, Finally, I can join by turning on my mouth. Well, my daughter doesn't believe in the tooth fairies, and I don't believe in paying taxes without suppression measures. A combination of both, especially in our environment, where we need to invest additional efforts to develop tax culture. We need to insist on incentives, but the taxpayers should know that if they do not pay taxes, there will be sanctions imposed on them. I would love to have carrots. I would like to have a stick in the form of a carrot, or to offer a carrot cake. But the point is, the people respect threat or danger or threat that they would be imposed the sanction. So if there is a credible threat that you would be caught and punished if you don't do as you're supposed to be doing, this is something that helps most with the tax discipline. And another thing is, we see that software is cheaply sold. There is a cheap software that can help people to comply. And I see this on my personal example. I play with different scenarios, and then I usually opt for standard deductions, something that does not require audit. But before that, you know everything about your liabilities. What is your tax? What is the interest rate? So I'm talking about the combination of education, credible risk of audit, or that you will be caught in the act. And for the end, we have the national program for the suppression of the shadow economy in place. Serbia is among the rare countries to have one. And a quick question, could you mention one or two measures that should be applied as soon as possible to improve the tax culture? We will go with the same order. This means myself. Well, this entire program, if we take a look at the system that it imposes in place, it's interesting. Also, 5.5 measure. Campaign, education, this involves campaign, education, this is my favorite. Mr. Djukanovic, well, measure number 8, yes, education of taxpayers, this is the future that we should all aspire to. Mr. Altiparmakov? I would opt for the capacity building of the tax administration in terms of staffing capacities and others. But let me answer to a student's question. The capacity building of the tax administration also implies the building of the fair system. And I don't think that it is fair to apply 55% tax rate at the 300 or 400 euros earned per month, and this should be regulated within the existing tax system. Igor? Capacity building for the tax administration, improving the staffing capacity of the tax administration, hiring younger people, educating the general public, citizens. And we saw that the discussion has shown that it is obvious that the taxation system is mature, is ready for a new reform. We had a law that was adopted in 2001, and there were 25 amendments to it. The question becomes as to whether we should change the concept and move on to a synthetic taxation model from the current one, and to correct the imbalance that we have perceived, and to tax those who are more powerful. So the question of the student is whether the tax culture would be better had we had lower tax rates, because we have countries with high tax rates and well-developed tax culture. If we take a look at our tax system, our taxes are not that high. We have something that is called an untaxed monthly minimum. It's 16,000 dinars. It has increased in time. This is the salary, the share of the salary that is not taxed, that is untaxed. And if we compare ourselves to other countries, we cannot say that our taxes are high. We have moderate tax rates. And when it comes to the annual and income tax and personal income tax, the total tax that people pay can go from 17 to 18% to 23%. This is 1/5 kept by the government. 1/5 of their income kept by the government, and it is very important for us to build the awareness of people, saying that if you earn something, you need to pay taxes on that. I think that a strong, modern tax administration is a prerequisite of all these activities that we mentioned. Without the awareness, taxpayers' awareness of a capable tax administration that will detect their evasion, any evasion, any education would be in vain. So a prerequisite for us to start developing tax culture and compliance, a prerequisite of all these things that contribute to our budget spending, is a strong and developed tax administration. Mr. Vujovic, what is your favorite measure within the national program? Yes, many of them have been mentioned before, and many measures have been initiated. We are in the midst of the process, so the reform, the tax administration reform per se, is not something that we should question. It should be completed. We don't expect to have an ideal tax administration, but at least it should be ready and capable to fight any discretionary influence on their work. Basically, we need we need electronic system. So, for instance, when JICA comes, there shouldn't be, nobody should negotiate with him about the amount of taxes that he will pay. This is the purpose of the reform, of the transformation of the tax administration. 90% of people are correct ones, and they all can learn new ways. I'm not talking about those who will retire soon. And everywhere in the world, we see that people spend 5-10 years working in the tax administration and then move on to the private sector. But also, it is important to educate citizens. It is important to promote it. I see in other countries, my son, Boris, learns about taxes in the 2nd grade of the elementary school, and how and what is the importance of the taxes. And the government needs to account for every dollar used, every amount used. Now we can only add patches to the loopholes that exist. We have people working for KPMG and other companies that can help us. But I think that a Serbian turbo tax program could be something. So basically, we could introduce the system, promote the system. This would be sort of campaign. People either are non-compliant because they don't know what to do how to be compliant, or they do it in the wrong way. I think that this was a rather informative panel, and there are many other questions that still need, they're still waiting to be responded to, and we had more than 200 people watching this panel, and I hope that this was interesting to them. And I would like to turn it over to our coordinator to present the rules of the competition. At the end of today's debate, we would, or panel, we would present the competition, and they can learn more about this at the web page under the title "Take the Invoice," And this effort is launched to contribute to the improvement of the tax to the tax culture. NALED organizes the event with the support of the Belgrade University, with the support of KPMG and GIZ within the joint program, the support to the government of Serbia in the suppression of the shadow economy. Given that this is student competition, the students of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year of the basic studies and postgraduates, students of postgraduate programs have the right to take part. All of them attending public and private universities or schools have the right to compete. They can form teams of 2 members from the same and different schools, and those who cannot find their pair, they can turn to us and we will find a person with a similar interest to take part. As for the duration of the competition, it will formally start today in a couple of minutes from now. And today's debate was just an introductory panel discussion launched with the purpose to help students understand the topic and better prepare to address it. And the students have until the November 23rd to register their teams at the webpage Take the Invoice. There is a web page called the Tax Debate, and there is an online registration form for them to fill in and register. And then they have by November 25th, when NALED would select or choose those who comply with the requirements and determine the teams of those who support suppression measures and incentives. And now they have until December 4 to prepare a video lasting from 3 to 5 minutes to defend their opinion. This is something new, an innovative approach to debates, given the situation with the pandemic. But I think that you will successfully complete this task. And once you send the video material, we will publish it on our webpage. All video recordings would be placed on our webpage, and the visitors of the page would be able to vote for it, and also a team of experts would vote and would evaluate video recordings. The commission is composed of the tax administration representatives, Belgrade University representatives, and other experts. And the criteria against which the video materials will be evaluated would be the level or the extent at which the video is in line with the topic, whether the arguments are well explained and whether they're persuasive, and to what extent would the suggestions increase or improve the tax culture, and in general the whole approach to the topic would be evaluated. In the meantime, on the December 15th, we would announce the winner, the video material that got the largest number of hits or the votes of the audience, and then in the second half of December, there will be a debate presented by the panel of experts, a commission of experts, and so this is going to be the battle of finalists. And those finalists would have to defend their arguments and basically confront each other and the commission, and then the awards will be presented. There are 3 types of awards. The award of the audience, also the wireless headphones for each participant. Basically, the team who wins at the Facebook would get this award, and the finalists, so the 4 members of 2 teams would get a special award, a tablet, And the winning team, they would be basically unable to work for 3 months within NALED or KPMG with the salary of 300 euros per month. They would work part-time. And please visit the page uzmirachun.rs for more information. And if need be, if you need to consult with us, please write to us at the office at naled.rs. And also the web page, as I said, the web page Uzmirachun includes all additional information. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you good luck. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of today's event, today's debate that concerned the tax culture in Serbia. Once again, I would like to extend my thanks to the Belgrade University and Rector Popovic, and also company KPMG and GIZ for their support. And also would like to extend my thanks to Mr. Nere, Mr. Vujovic, Mr. Altiparmakov, Mr. Lončarević, and Mr. Džinović, and Professor Ilić Popov for their participation. And also, I would like to invite you to keep following our activities.